The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Training Facility in Coronado, California, as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell completed her third consecutive mile in under 6 minutes. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her breathing remained controlled and steady. At 26, she had already proven herself in ways most people never would, but today would test her in ways she never imagined. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Montana, where her father worked as a ranch hand and her mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. From an early age, she learned that respect wasn't given freely. It had to be earned through action, determination, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. When she announced at 17 that she wanted to join the Navy, her parents were skeptical but supportive. They had raised her to believe she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. The path to becoming a Navy SEAL had been brutal. Sarah was part of the first class to include women in the program, and the scrutiny was intense. Every move she made was analyzed, criticized, and questioned. While her male counterparts faced the same physical challenges, they didn't have to deal with the additional pressure of representing an entire gender. Sarah carried that weight on her shoulders every single day. During basic underwater demolition training, she had endured Hell Week alongside 37 other candidates. By the end of those grueling 6 days, only 8 remained standing, and Sarah was one of them. She had crawled through mud under barbed wire, carried telephone poles weighing hundreds of pounds, and performed countless push-ups in the freezing Pacific Ocean. Each challenge was designed to break the human spirit, but Sarah's spirit proved unbreakable. Her instructors had been tough, but fair. They pushed her to her limits and beyond, but they never made her feel like she didn't belong. Master Chief Peterson, a 20-year veteran with hands like granite and eyes that had seen too much combat, became an unlikely mentor. He pulled her aside after particularly difficult training sessions and offered guidance that went beyond military tactics. "Mitchell," he would say in his gravelly voice, "being the first means every eye is on you. Some people are waiting for you to succeed, others are waiting for you to fail. Your job is to ignore both groups and focus on the mission at hand." Sarah took his advice to heart. She studied harder, trained longer, and pushed herself further than anyone expected. When graduation day arrived, she stood proudly among her 7 classmates as they received their SEAL tridents. The small golden pin represented years of sacrifice, pain, and dedication. As it was pinned to her uniform, Sarah felt the weight of history and the hope of future generations of women who might follow in her footsteps. Her first assignment had been with SEAL Team 7, where she served as a communications specialist and demolitions expert. The team's commanding officer, Commander Jackson, was a fair leader who evaluated his personnel based solely on their performance. Under his leadership, Sarah thrived. She participated in training exercises across the globe, from the jungles of Panama to the mountains of Afghanistan. Sarah's specialty was underwater demolitions, a skill that required not only technical expertise, but also the mental fortitude to work in some of the most dangerous conditions imaginable. She could hold her breath for over 4 minutes while performing complex tasks underwater. Her teammates respected her abilities and trusted her with their lives. In the SEAL community, there was no higher honor. During a training exercise in the Philippines, Sarah's team was tasked with infiltrating a mock enemy compound and neutralizing specific targets. The operation required them to approach the target from the water, plant explosive charges on predetermined structures, and extract without being detected. Sarah was responsible for the underwater approach and primary demolitions. As her team prepared their equipment on the beach, Sarah noticed they were being observed by personnel from another unit. She recognized some of them as members of a Marine reconnaissance team that was conducting parallel training exercises. Among the observers was Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a decorated Marine officer with a reputation for arrogance and a particular disdain for what he considered political correctness in the military. Webb had made his opinions about women in combat roles known throughout the base. He believed that including women in elite military units compromised operational effectiveness and put lives at risk. His views were not uncommon, but he was more vocal about them than most. Several times during joint training exercises, he had made comments that were inappropriate and unprofessional. Sarah had heard about Webb's reputation but had never interacted with him directly. She focused on her mission preparation, checking and double-checking her equipment. Her diving gear was meticulously maintained, and her explosive charges were precisely calibrated for the training objectives. She had learned early in her career that preparation was the key to success, and she never cut corners. As Sarah's team entered the water, she could feel Webb's eyes on her. She ignored the distraction and focused on her breathing and movement through the water. The underwater approach required her to navigate using only a compass and her internal sense of direction. The water was murky, visibility was limited, and the current was stronger than anticipated. 20 minutes into the dive, Sarah reached the target structure. She began placing the explosive charges according to the mission plan when she noticed something was wrong. The structure wasn't matching the specifications they had been given during the briefing. She surfaced quietly and signaled to her team leader, who was positioned on shore with night vision equipment. Through hand signals, Sarah communicated the discrepancy. Her team leader, Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, had been working with Sarah for over 2 years and trusted her judgment completely. He made the decision to abort the exercise and return to shore for a mission brief. As Sarah's team gathered on the beach to debrief, Webb approached with several of his Marines. His manner was aggressive and confrontational from the moment he opened his mouth. "Having some trouble out there?" he asked sarcastically. "Maybe this kind of mission is a little too complex for some people." Sarah continued packing her gear, refusing to take the bait. She had dealt with men like Webb before, and she knew that engaging with them only made the situation worse. Her team members, however, were less inclined to ignore the provocation. "Problem with our mission execution, Lieutenant?" Rodriguez asked, stepping slightly in front of Sarah. "Just making an observation," Webb replied. "Seems like when things get complicated, some people start making excuses." Sarah finally looked up from her equipment. "The target structure didn't match our mission parameters," she said calmly. "Standard protocol is to abort and reassess when intelligence doesn't match actual conditions." Webb laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the beach. "Standard protocol? Or standard excuse when someone's not up to the job?" The tension on the beach was thick. Sarah's teammates were getting angry, and Webb's Marines were backing him up. Sarah realized that this confrontation was heading toward a dangerous place, and she needed to defuse it before it escalated further. "Lieutenant Webb," she said, standing up and facing him directly. "I followed proper procedures based on the mission briefing. If you have concerns about our operational methods, I suggest you discuss them with our commanding officers." Webb stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. "I don't need to discuss anything with anyone. What I see is someone who talked their way into a job they can't handle and now wants to hide behind regulations when things get tough." Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but her voice remained steady. "I've completed every training exercise successfully, and my performance record speaks for itself." "Performance record?" Webb scoffed. "You mean the record where everyone has to pretend you're as capable as the men around you? Where standards get lowered so you can keep up?" That accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had worked twice as hard as everyone else precisely to avoid that kind of criticism. Every achievement in her career had been earned through sweat, determination, and excellence. The suggestion that she had been given special treatment was not only false, but deeply insulting. "My standards have never been lowered," she said, her voice carrying an edge of steel. "Every test, every evaluation, every mission has been completed to the same standards as every other SEAL." Webb's smile was cruel and calculating. "That's what they tell you, sweetheart. But everyone knows the truth. You're here because the politicians wanted a pretty face to put on recruiting posters, not because you earned it." The word "sweetheart" hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah's teammates were moving closer, and the situation was rapidly spinning out of control. Sarah knew that whatever happened next would be remembered and talked about for years to come. Every action she took would be scrutinized and analyzed by people looking to either support or undermine the presence of women in special operations. "Lieutenant Webb," she said, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of leadership training, "I'm going to give you one opportunity to apologize for that comment and walk away." Webb laughed again, but there was something different in his expression now. He had expected her to back down or become emotional. Instead, she was standing her ground with a confidence that seemed to surprise him. "Apologize," he said. "For what?" "Telling the truth." Sarah took a step closer to Webb, closing the distance between them. She was several inches shorter than him, but her presence seemed to fill the space around her. Years of training had taught her how to project authority regardless of her physical size. "The truth is that I've earned every achievement in my career through hard work and dedication," she said. "The truth is that I've completed every training program, passed every test, and succeeded in every mission I've been assigned." The truth is that you're intimidated by the fact that a woman can do everything you can do, and probably do it better. Webb's face flushed with anger. You think you're better than me? I don't think anything, Sarah replied. I know what my record shows, and I know what yours shows. If you want to compare achievements, I'm happy to do that. The challenge was clear, and Webb had painted himself into a corner. He had started this confrontation expecting an easy target, but Sarah wasn't backing down. His Marines were watching, her teammates were watching, and now he had to either back up his words or admit he was wrong. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. Let's see how tough you really are. Sarah realized that Webb was about to do something that would cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She could see it in his posture, in the way his hands were clenching into fists, in the way his breathing had changed. He was about to make a mistake that would end his career and potentially escalate into something much more serious. Lieutenant Webb, she said, her voice carrying a warning tone, I strongly recommend that you reconsider whatever you're thinking about doing. But Webb was beyond rational thought now. His pride had been challenged, his authority had been questioned, and he was surrounded by witnesses. In his mind, he had to assert dominance or lose face in front of his men. Shut up, he snarled, and raised his hand. The moment seemed to stretch out in slow motion. Sarah saw Webb's hand coming toward her face and realized that he was actually going to hit her. In that instant, everything she had worked for, everything she had achieved, and everything she represented came into sharp focus. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every woman who had ever been told she wasn't strong enough, smart enough, or tough enough to succeed in a man's world. Webb's hand was moving fast, but Sarah's reflexes were faster. Years of combat training had honed her responses to a razor's edge. She could see exactly where the blow was aimed, and she knew exactly how to respond. But she also knew that whatever she did in the next few seconds would be remembered for the rest of her career. As Webb's hand came within inches of her face, Sarah moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of combat. Her response would be measured, precise, and completely devastating to a man who had made the fatal mistake of underestimating her capabilities. The beach fell silent except for the sound of waves washing against the shore. Everyone present knew they were witnessing a moment that would be talked about for years to come. Lieutenant Marcus Webb had just made a decision that would change his life forever, and Sarah Mitchell was about to show him exactly why that decision was the worst mistake he had ever made. Webb's confidence was about to be shattered, his assumptions were about to be proven wrong, and his career was about to take a turn that he never saw coming. He thought he could intimidate a woman who had fought harder than most men ever would just to earn the right to stand on that beach. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The moment Webb's hand began its trajectory towards Sarah's face, time seemed to compress into a single heartbeat. Every instinct honed through years of rigorous training kicked in simultaneously. Sarah's body moved with the precision of a weapon that had been forged in the fires of Hell Week and tempered through countless hours of hand-to-hand combat instruction. Webb's swing was wild and overconfident, the kind of haymaker throw by someone who had never faced a truly skilled opponent. He put too much of his weight behind the punch, leaving himself completely off balance and vulnerable. Sarah saw the opening immediately and responded with the cold efficiency of a professional warrior. She ducked under the incoming blow, using Webb's momentum against him. As his fist passed harmlessly through the air where her head had been, Sarah pivoted on her left foot and drove her right elbow upward into Webb's solar plexus. The strike was delivered with surgical precision, hitting the exact spot that would maximize impact while minimizing permanent damage. Webb's breath exploded from his lungs in a whoosh that could be heard across the beach. His eyes went wide with shock and pain as his diaphragm spasmed. Before he could even begin to recover, Sarah followed up with a swift leg sweep that sent him crashing to the sand. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds. Webb lay on his back, gasping for air and staring up at the stars that had suddenly appeared in his vision. His Marines stood frozen in disbelief, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Their commanding officer, a decorated combat veteran who prided himself on his physical prowess, had been dismantled by a woman who was a head shorter and 50 pounds lighter than him. Sarah stood over Webb, her breathing steady and controlled. She could have inflicted much more damage if she had chosen to, but she had used exactly the amount of force necessary to end the threat without causing serious injury. It was a demonstration of restraint that spoke to her professionalism and training. "Stay down, Lieutenant," she said quietly. "This doesn't have to get any worse than it already is." Webb tried to speak, but his diaphragm was still spasming from the elbow strike. He rolled onto his side, clutching his stomach and trying to suck air back into his lungs. The arrogant smirk that had been on his face moments before was completely gone, replaced by confusion and humiliation. Rodriguez stepped forward, his hand resting on his sidearm. "Anyone else want to try something stupid?" he asked Webb's Marines. The question was asked calmly, but there was steel in his voice that made it clear he was prepared for any escalation. The Marines shook their heads quickly. They were loyal to their officer, but they weren't stupid. They had just watched a Navy SEAL dismantle their lieutenant with embarrassing ease, and they had no desire to test their luck against an entire SEAL team. Sarah looked around at the assembled group, making eye contact with each person present. "What happened here tonight stays here," she said. "Lieutenant Webb made a mistake, and he paid for it. As far as I'm concerned, the matter is settled if he agrees to keep his hands to himself from now on." Webb finally managed to get enough air into his lungs to speak. You hit me," he wheezed, as if he couldn't believe what had happened. "You hit yourself," Sarah replied. "I just got out of the way. If you swing at someone who's trained in hand-to-hand combat, you should expect them to defend themselves." The logic of her statement was undeniable, but Webb's pride was wounded more than his body. He had initiated the physical confrontation in front of witnesses, and he had been thoroughly and publicly humiliated. His reputation as a tough Marine officer was in tatters, and everyone on the base would know about it by morning. "This isn't over," he said, struggling to get back to his feet. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes grew colder. "Lieutenant Webb, I'm going to give you some free advice. You just attacked a Navy SEAL without provocation in front of multiple witnesses. Right now, I'm willing to chalk this up to poor judgment and let it go. But if you make this into an ongoing problem, I promise you that things will not end well for you." Rodriguez stepped closer to Webb, his hand still resting on his weapon. "The lady is being generous, Lieutenant. If it were up to me, you'd already be in restraints waiting for the MPs. I suggest you take her offer and walk away while you still can." Webb looked around at the faces surrounding him. His own Marines were avoiding eye contact, clearly embarrassed by their leader's behavior and its consequences. Sarah's teammates were watching him with expressions that ranged from contempt to pity. He was completely isolated and outgunned. "Fine," he said finally, brushing sand off his uniform. "But this doesn't change anything. You still don't belong here." Sarah smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Lieutenant, after what just happened, I don't think you're in a position to decide who belongs anywhere." Webb's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment, but he had enough sense left to realize that continuing this confrontation would only make things worse for him. He turned to his Marines and barked an order to pack up their equipment. Within minutes, the Marine reconnaissance team had disappeared into the darkness, leaving Sarah and her teammates alone on the beach. As soon as the Marines were gone, Sarah's teammates erupted in celebration. They had watched their teammate face down a bully and emerge victorious, and their pride in her performance was obvious. Rodriguez clapped her on the shoulder and grinned. "Mitchell, that was the most beautiful thing I've seen since my daughter was born," he said. "Webb's been running his mouth about women in combat for months. It's about time someone shut him up." Sarah wasn't feeling celebratory, though. She knew that what had happened tonight would have consequences that extended far beyond the immediate confrontation. Webb's humiliation would fuel his resentment, and he would likely spend every waking moment looking for a way to get revenge. She had made an enemy tonight, and that enemy had connections throughout the military hierarchy. "We need to report this incident," she said. "Webb attacked me without provocation, and there were plenty of witnesses. If we don't file an official report, he'll have time to spin the story in his favor." Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "You're right. We need to get ahead of this before Webb tries to claim he was defending himself or some other nonsense." The team packed their equipment quickly and efficiently. Sarah's movements were precise and methodical, showing no sign of the adrenaline that was still coursing through her system. She had learned early in her career to compartmentalize her emotions during and after combat situations. There would be time to process what had happened later, but right now she needed to focus on the next steps. As they walked back toward the base, Sarah replayed the confrontation in her mind. She had handled the physical aspect perfectly, using minimum force to neutralize the threat while avoiding serious injury to her attacker. But she knew that the political ramifications of the incident would be much more complex and potentially damaging. Webb represented a significant faction within the military that believed women had no place in combat roles. His public humiliation at the hands of a female SEAL would be seen as a victory for gender integration advocates, but it would also intensify the opposition's efforts to prove that women were a liability in combat situations. Sarah had always tried to avoid being seen as a symbol or a spokesperson for women's rights in the military. She wanted to be judged on her merits as a soldier, not as a representative of her gender. But circumstances had a way of forcing people into roles they didn't choose, and tonight's incident would likely make her a lightning rod for controversy, whether she wanted that role or not. The base was quiet as they approached the main gate. Most personnel were either asleep or engaged in night training exercises. The guard on duty recognized Sarah's team and waved them through without challenge. Sarah had been stationed at this base for over a year, and her reputation for professionalism and competence had earned her respect throughout the command structure. As they entered the administrative building to file their report, Sarah caught sight of herself in a window reflection. Her uniform was slightly wrinkled from the confrontation, but otherwise she looked exactly the same as she had when the evening began. There was no visible sign of what had just happened, no indication that she had just thoroughly dismantled a Marine lieutenant's ego and possibly changed the trajectory of her own career. The duty officer was Petty Officer Second Class Anderson, a career Navy man who had seen enough action to recognize the signs of a significant incident. He looked up from his paperwork as Sarah's team entered and immediately sensed that something serious had occurred. "What can I do for you folks tonight?" he asked. Rodriguez stepped forward. "We need to file an incident report. One of our team members was physically assaulted by Lieutenant Marcus Webb during a training exercise." Anderson's eyebrows went up. Webb's reputation for causing problems was well known among the base personnel. "Is anyone injured?" "Lieutenant Webb is going to have some bruised ribs and a wounded ego," Rodriguez replied. "But no serious injuries." Anderson pulled out the necessary paperwork and began taking their statements. The process was thorough and methodical, with each team member providing their account of what had happened. Anderson was careful to document every detail, understanding that this incident would likely generate significant attention from higher command levels. Sarah's statement was clear and factual. She described Webb's verbal harassment, his escalation to physical violence, and her defensive response. She made no attempt to minimize what had happened or to portray herself as a victim. She simply stated the facts and let them speak for themselves. As they finished the paperwork, Anderson looked directly at Sarah. "I've heard good things about you, Petty Officer Mitchell. You've got a solid reputation on this base. But this incident is going to attract attention from people who don't know you personally. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm prepared for whatever comes next, Petty Officer Anderson. I did what any SEAL would do when attacked. If that creates problems for some people, that's their issue to deal with, not mine." Anderson nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. But you should know that Webb has some powerful friends in the Marine Corps. This isn't going to just disappear." "I understand," Sarah replied. "But I'm not going to apologize for defending myself against an unprovoked attack." As they left the administrative building, Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. She had handled the immediate crisis effectively, but she knew that the real challenges were just beginning. Webb's attack had been a moment of poor judgment that lasted only seconds, but the aftermath would likely extend for months or even years. The walk back to her quarters was quiet. Her teammates had dispersed to their own rooms, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. The base was peaceful in the pre-dawn hours, with only the sound of distant ocean waves and the occasional vehicle to break the silence. Sarah's room was Spartan but comfortable, reflecting her practical nature and military lifestyle. She had few personal possessions beyond some photos of her family and a small collection of books on military history and strategy. She sat on her bunk and began writing in her personal journal, a habit she had maintained since joining the Navy. As she wrote, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Every challenge she had faced, every obstacle she had overcome, had prepared her for tonight's confrontation. Webb had expected to intimidate a woman who wasn't prepared to fight back, but he had instead encountered a warrior who was ready for anything he could throw at her. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that Webb's attempt to prove her weakness had instead demonstrated her strength. His public humiliation would serve as a lesson to others who might be tempted to test her resolve. Word would spread quickly through the military community that Sarah Mitchell was not someone to be underestimated or provoked. But Sarah also knew that victories like tonight's came with a price. She had made an enemy who would undoubtedly seek revenge, and that enemy had allies who shared his views about women in combat roles. The next phase of her career would be marked by increased scrutiny, political maneuvering, and possibly more direct challenges to her authority and competence. As she finished her journal entry and prepared for bed, Sarah felt a sense of quiet confidence about the future. She had proven tonight that she could handle whatever challenges came her way, whether they were physical confrontations or political obstacles. Lieutenant Webb had thought he could hit her and get away with it, but he had learned a painful lesson about the consequences of underestimating a Navy SEAL. The lieutenant's regret was just beginning, but Sarah Mitchell was ready for whatever came next. The first indication that Sarah's confrontation with Lieutenant Webb had attracted attention from higher command levels came at 0600 hours the next morning. She was halfway through her usual pre-dawn workout when Petty Officer Anderson appeared at the entrance to the gym, looking unusually serious. "Petty Officer Mitchell," he called out. "Commander Jackson wants to see you in his office immediately." Sarah finished her set of pull-ups and grabbed her towel. She had been expecting this summons since filing the incident report, but the timing suggested that word had traveled up the chain of command faster than usual. Someone with influence was taking a personal interest in what had happened on the beach. Commander Jackson's office reflected his 22 years of naval service. The walls were covered with commendations, unit citations, and photographs from deployments around the world. Behind his desk hung a framed copy of the Navy SEAL Creed, a reminder of the values that guided every member of the elite force. Jackson was reviewing a file when Sarah knocked on his doorframe. He looked up and gestured for her to enter and closed the door behind her. His expression was neutral, giving no indication of his mood or intentions. "Have a seat, Mitchell," he said, setting the file aside. "I've been reading the incident report from last night. Quite a situation you found yourself in." Sarah sat down and maintained eye contact. "Yes, sir. I defended myself when Lieutenant Webb attempted to assault me." "So I gathered," Jackson replied. "According to the witness statements, you handled yourself with appropriate restraint and professionalism. However, the political implications of this incident are significant." Jackson opened another file and removed several documents. "I've already received 3 phone calls this morning. One from Lieutenant Webb's commanding officer, one from the base commander, and one from someone at the Pentagon whose name I'm not authorized to share with you." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Pentagon involvement meant that this incident had already reached the highest levels of military leadership. Someone with serious influence was taking a personal interest in what had happened between her and Webb. "What did they want to discuss, sir?" she asked. Jackson leaned back in his chair and studied Sarah's face carefully. "Lieutenant Webb is claiming that you attacked him without provocation. He says he was attempting to shake hands and make peace when you assaulted him with excessive force." Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "Sir, that's completely false. We have multiple witnesses who can verify that Lieutenant Webb raised his hand to strike me first. I know that, and your teammates have given statements supporting your version of events," Jackson said. "But Webb's story is being backed up by his Marines, who are claiming they saw something different." The betrayal shouldn't have surprised Sarah, but it still stung. Webb's subordinates were lying to protect their commanding officer, even though they knew he had been in the wrong. It was a reminder of how quickly military loyalties could shift when careers were on the line. "Sir, Petty Officer Rodriguez and the rest of my team saw exactly what happened. Lieutenant Webb made inappropriate comments about women in combat, escalated the confrontation, and then attempted to strike me when I refused to back down." Jackson nodded slowly. "I believe you, Mitchell. Your record speaks for itself, and your teammates are some of the most reliable people I've ever served with. But believing you and being able to protect you from the political fallout are 2 different things." He opened the file again and removed a photograph. It showed Webb lying on the sand with Sarah standing over him, captured by someone's cell phone camera in the moments after their confrontation. The image was damaging because it showed only the aftermath, not the events that led up to it. "This photo is already circulating through social media and military forums," Jackson said. "Without context, it looks like you attacked a Marine officer who was down and helpless." Sarah studied the photograph, recognizing how easily it could be misinterpreted by people who hadn't witnessed the actual confrontation. Whoever had taken the picture had carefully framed it to maximize the visual impact, while removing any context that might explain what had really happened. "Who took this photo, sir?" she asked. "We don't know yet, but we're investigating. What we do know is that it's being used to support a narrative that you're unstable and dangerous." Webb's allies are claiming this incident proves that women lack the emotional control necessary for special operations. Jackson closed the file and leaned forward. Mitchell, I've served with you for over a year. I know your character, your capabilities, and your dedication to the mission. But there are people in this military who see you as a symbol of everything they think is wrong with modern warfare. Sarah understood the implications of what he was saying. Her success as a female Navy SEAL had made her a target for people who opposed gender integration in combat roles. Webb's attack had given them ammunition to use against not just her, but against all women serving in special operations. "What are my options, sir?" she asked. Jackson was quiet for several moments, weighing his words carefully. "Officially, you're going to be transferred to a different unit while this matter is investigated. The investigation will likely take several weeks, during which time you'll be assigned to administrative duties." Sarah felt her heart sink. Administrative duties meant being sidelined from active operations, possibly for months. It would derail her career trajectory and send a message to other women in the military that speaking up or defending yourself came with serious consequences. "And unofficially, sir?" Jackson's expression grew grimmer. "Unofficially, there are people who want to make an example of you. They see this incident as an opportunity to prove that women can't handle the pressure of special operations. They're going to do everything they can to destroy your career and use your case to roll back integration policies." The weight of the situation settled on Sarah's shoulders. She had known that being one of the first women in special operations would come with challenges, but she hadn't anticipated becoming the center of a political firestorm. Her personal confrontation with Webb had become a symbol in a much larger battle about the future of women in combat. "I won't resign or request a transfer to avoid this fight," she said firmly. "If they want to make an example of me, they'll have to do it properly, with a fair investigation and due process." Jackson smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "I was hoping you'd say that. You're going to need legal representation, and you're going to need allies who can match the political influence being brought against you." He handed her another file. "I've taken the liberty of contacting Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes from the Judge Advocate General's office. She specializes in cases involving special operations personnel, and she has experience dealing with politically sensitive situations." Sarah reviewed Hayes' credentials quickly. She was clearly qualified and experienced, but Sarah had learned to be cautious about trusting anyone in a situation like this. Too many careers had been destroyed by lawyers who were more interested in political expedience than justice. "She'll be here this afternoon to discuss your case," Jackson continued. "In the meantime, you're restricted to base until further notice." "I'm sorry, but that order comes from levels above both of us." Sarah nodded in understanding. Being restricted to base was standard procedure during an investigation, but it still felt like punishment for defending herself. She was being treated like a criminal, while Webb was free to continue spreading his version of events to anyone who would listen. "Sir, what about my team? Are they facing any consequences for supporting my account of what happened?" Jackson's expression darkened. "Your teammates are being pressured to change their statements. They're being told that loyalty to you is disloyalty to the Navy, and that supporting your version of events could damage their own careers." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her teammates had risked their lives alongside her on countless occasions, and now they were being punished for telling the truth about what they had witnessed. The corruption of the investigation was worse than she had imagined. "Have any of them changed their statements?" she asked. "Not yet," Jackson replied. Rodriguez told the investigators that he'd rather face a court-martial than lie about what he saw. The others have been equally adamant about sticking to their original statements. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her teammates' integrity, but she also felt guilty about the position she had put them in. Their loyalty to her was costing them politically, and she knew that their careers could be damaged regardless of how the investigation concluded. "There's something else you need to know," Jackson said. "Webb has filed a formal complaint alleging that you've created a hostile work environment for male personnel. He's claiming that your presence in special operations has led to lowered standards and decreased unit cohesion." The accusation was particularly galling because Sarah had spent her entire career working to avoid exactly that perception. She had consistently performed at the highest levels, maintained excellent relationships with her teammates, and gone out of her way to prove that gender integration could work seamlessly in combat units. "Sir, my performance evaluations have been consistently excellent. I've never had any complaints about my conduct or professionalism." "I know that, and so does anyone who's actually worked with you," Jackson said. "But Webb is painting a picture of systemic problems that he claims have been covered up by politically motivated commanders. Sarah realized that Webb's strategy was more sophisticated than she had initially thought. Rather than simply claiming he was the victim of an unprovoked attack, he was positioning himself as a whistleblower exposing problems with gender integration. It was a narrative that would resonate with people who already opposed women in combat roles. The hearing is scheduled for next week, Jackson continued. You'll have a chance to present your side of the story and call witnesses to support your version of events. But I want you to understand that this isn't just about what happened on the beach. This is about the future of women in special operations. The pressure was enormous. Sarah wasn't just fighting for her own career. She was fighting for the careers of every woman who might follow in her footsteps. If she lost this battle, it would set a precedent that could be used to exclude women from combat roles for decades to come. I understand the stakes, sir, she said. But I'm not going to compromise the truth to make this easier for anyone. What happened on that beach was clear and straightforward. Lieutenant Webb attacked me, and I defended myself using appropriate force. If the investigation is conducted fairly, that's what the evidence will show. Jackson stood up and walked to the window overlooking the training facilities. Young sailors were conducting morning exercises on the grounds below, unaware of the political battle being fought in the offices above them. Mitchell, there's one more thing I need to tell you, he said without turning around. I've been ordered to recommend disciplinary action against you regardless of what the investigation concludes. Sarah felt the room spin around her. Even her own commanding officer was being pressured to betray her, despite his obvious belief in her innocence and professionalism. Will you do it, sir? She asked quietly. Jackson turned back to face her, and Sarah could see the conflict in his eyes. He was caught between his duty to support his subordinates and the pressure being applied by his superiors. I haven't decided yet, he said honestly. But I want you to know that whatever I'm forced to do officially, my personal opinion of you and your service hasn't changed. You're one of the finest SEALs I've ever commanded, and what's happening to you is wrong. As Sarah left Commander Jackson's office, she felt the full weight of the conspiracy forming against her. Webb's attack had been just the beginning. Now she was facing a coordinated effort to destroy her career and use her case to roll back progress on gender integration in the military. But Sarah Mitchell hadn't survived Hell Week and earned her seal, Trident, by giving up when things got difficult. The political battle ahead would be more challenging than any physical confrontation, but she was prepared to fight for her career, her reputation, and the future of women in special operations. Lieutenant Webb's regret was about to deepen considerably. He had started a war that he wasn't prepared to finish. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes arrived at the base that afternoon in a government sedan that looked like countless others in the military motor pool. But there was nothing ordinary about the woman who stepped out of the vehicle. Hayes carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought legal battles in some of the most challenging environments the military had to offer. Sarah watched from her quarters window as Hayes spoke briefly with the base security guard before being escorted toward the administrative building. She was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in her mid-30s, with short auburn hair and the kind of intense focus that suggested she took every case personally. 20 minutes later, Sarah was sitting across from Hayes in a conference room that had been hastily cleared for their meeting. Hayes spread files and documents across the table with methodical precision, creating what looked like a command center for a major military operation. I've reviewed the incident reports, witness statements, and preliminary investigation notes. Hayes began without preamble. I've also seen the photograph that's circulating online and reviewed Lieutenant Webb's formal complaint. What we're dealing with here is not just a simple assault case. This has become a test case for gender integration in special operations. Sarah had reached the same conclusion, but hearing it stated so bluntly by her legal counsel made the situation feel even more serious. What are my chances of getting through this with my career intact? Hayes looked up from her notes and studied Sarah's face carefully. That depends on several factors. Your record is exemplary. Your teammates are backing your account of events, and the physical evidence supports your claim of self-defense. But the political pressure being applied against you is unlike anything I've seen in 15 years of military law. She pulled out a thick folder and opened it to reveal dozens of documents, photographs, and communication records. I've been doing some research on Lieutenant Webb and his connections within the Marine Corps. What I've found is disturbing, but not surprising. Hayes spread several photographs across the table showing Webb at various military social events and conferences. In many of the pictures, he was standing next to senior officers and civilian officials who were known opponents of gender integration in combat roles. Webb isn't just some hothead Marine who lost his temper, Hayes explained. He's connected to a network of people who have been systematically working to undermine progress on women in combat. Your confrontation gave them the perfect opportunity to create a test case. Sarah studied the photographs, recognizing several faces from news coverage of congressional hearings on military policy. These weren't minor players. They were people with real influence over military careers and policy decisions. So this was planned? Sarah asked. Not the specific confrontation, Hayes replied. But Webb's behavior toward you wasn't random. He was looking for an opportunity to create an incident that could be used to support his political agenda. When you refused to back down, he escalated beyond what he had probably planned. Hayes pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of a prominent conservative political organization. This group has been lobbying Congress to reverse integration policies in special operations units. They're claiming that the physical and emotional differences between men and women make co-ed combat units inherently less effective. Sarah felt a surge of anger at seeing her personal confrontation with Webb being used to advance a broader political agenda. So they're using my case to try to exclude all women from special operations? Exactly, Hayes said. But here's what they didn't anticipate. Your response to Webb's attack was textbook perfect. You used minimum necessary force, showed appropriate restraint, and handled the situation with complete professionalism. Instead of proving their point about women being emotionally unstable, you demonstrated exactly the kind of competence and judgment that makes for an excellent special operations soldier. Hayes opened her laptop and showed Sarah a video file. I've been able to obtain security camera footage from a nearby training facility that captured part of your confrontation with Webb. It's not perfect quality, but it clearly shows him initiating the physical contact and you responding defensively. Sarah watched the grainy footage with a mixture of relief and satisfaction. The video clearly contradicted Webb's claim that he had been attempting to shake hands when she attacked him. Instead, it showed him raising his hand in an obviously aggressive manner and Sarah responding with precise defensive movements. This video wasn't included in the initial investigation files, Hayes noted. Someone tried to bury it, which suggests that there are people in the investigation process who aren't interested in finding the truth. The revelation about the suppressed evidence confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the integrity of the investigation. It also suggested that Hayes had resources and connections that could help level the playing field in what was clearly becoming a political battle. Who else knows about this video? Sarah asked. Right now, just us, Hayes replied. I obtained it through channels that I can't discuss, but I can guarantee its authenticity. The question is when and how we use it to maximum effect. Hayes closed the laptop and pulled out another set of documents. I've also been investigating the photographer who took that picture of you standing over Webb. It turns out he's not military personnel at all. He's a freelance journalist who's been embedded with various units doing a story on special operations training. Sarah's eyes widened. The presence of a journalist at what should have been a routine training exercise raised serious questions about how the confrontation had been orchestrated and documented. Did he just happen to be there when the confrontation occurred? Sarah asked. That's what we're supposed to believe, Hayes said with a skeptical expression. But, according to base logs, he wasn't scheduled to be in that area. Someone arranged for him to be in position to photograph the aftermath of your confrontation. The conspiracy was more elaborate than Sarah had realized. Not only had Webb been encouraged to provoke her, but someone had made sure that a photographer would be present to document the results. The whole incident had been designed to create damaging publicity that could be used to advance a political agenda. I want you to understand something, Hayes said, leaning forward. The people behind this conspiracy have resources, connections, and political influence that extend far beyond the military. They're prepared to destroy your career and reputation to achieve their goals. Are you prepared for the kind of fight this is going to become? Sarah met Hayes' gaze without hesitation. I've been preparing for this fight my entire career. Every day I've worn this uniform. I've known that there were people who didn't think I belonged here. I'm not going to let them use lies and political manipulation to prove a point that isn't true. Hayes smiled for the first time since their meeting began. Good. Because we're going to need that determination for what comes next. She pulled out a legal pad covered with handwritten notes. I've developed a strategy that I think can not only clear your name, but expose the conspiracy behind this whole incident. But it's going to require you to take some significant risks. Sarah leaned forward, eager to hear how they could turn the tables on her accusers. First, Hayes continued, we're going to demand a full investigation into how that photographer gained access to a restricted training area. We're going to subpoena communication records between Webb and his political contacts. And we're going to call witnesses who can testify about the pattern of harassment and provocation that led up to your confrontation. The plan was ambitious and aggressive, exactly the kind of approach Sarah had hoped for. But she could see potential problems with taking such a confrontational stance. Won't that approach make it look like I'm trying to deflect attention from my own actions? She asked. Possibly, Hayes admitted. But the alternative is to play defense while they control the narrative. Right now, they're portraying you as an unstable woman who attacked a male colleague without provocation. We need to show that you were the target of a deliberate campaign of harassment designed to provoke exactly the kind of incident that occurred. Hayes opened another file and removed a series of emails and text messages. I've already begun gathering evidence about Webb's connections to anti-integration activists. Some of these communications are quite damaging to his credibility. Sarah reviewed the messages, which showed Webb discussing strategies for exposing the problems with women in combat and planning opportunities to demonstrate the issues with co-ed units. While the messages didn't explicitly plan the confrontation that had occurred, they clearly showed that Webb had been actively seeking ways to create problems for female service members. How did you obtain these communications? Sarah asked. Hayes' expression became carefully neutral. Through legal discovery processes that I can't discuss in detail. But I can assure you that everything we're using was obtained properly and will be admissible in any formal hearing. The quality and scope of the evidence suggested that Hayes had access to investigative resources that went well beyond what a typical military lawyer could command. Sarah suspected that she wasn't the only person who recognized the broader implications of this case and wanted to see justice done. There's something else you need to know, Hayes said. I've been contacted by several female service members who have had similar experiences with Lieutenant Webb. They're willing to testify about his pattern of harassment and inappropriate behavior toward women. This was potentially explosive information. If Webb had a documented history of harassing female service members, it would completely undermine his credibility and support Sarah's claim that she had been deliberately provoked. Why haven't these women come forward before? Sarah asked. For the same reason most harassment victims don't come forward, Hayes replied. They were afraid of retaliation and damage to their careers. But your case has given them courage to speak up. They see your willingness to fight back as inspiration to tell their own stories. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. Her decision to stand up to Webb had apparently encouraged other women to find their own voices. But it also meant that the stakes of her case were even higher than she had realized. I need you to understand that taking this approach will make powerful enemies, Hayes warned. The people behind this conspiracy have worked for years to build their network and influence. They're not going to give up easily, and they have the resources to make your life very difficult even if we win this case. Sarah had already considered that possibility. Her confrontation with Webb had been a point of no return, and there was no going back to the way things were before. She could either fight for vindication and justice, or she could accept defeat and spend the rest of her career looking over her shoulder. I understand the risks, she said, but I also understand what's at stake. If we don't fight this battle now, it's going to be even harder for the women who come after me. Hayes nodded approvingly. Then, we're going to war. And I promise you, we're going to win. As their meeting concluded, Sarah felt a cautious optimism about her chances. Hayes had assembled a compelling case that went far beyond the simple question of who had attacked whom on a beach. She had uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military and political leadership, and she had the evidence to expose it. Lieutenant Webb thought he had destroyed Sarah's career with a single punch, but he was about to learn that he had awakened a sleeping giant. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just fighting for her own vindication anymore. She was fighting for the future of every woman who wanted to serve her country in combat. The battle lines had been drawn, and Sarah was ready for war. The hearing room was packed to capacity with military personnel, civilian officials, and members of the media who had somehow gained access despite strict security protocols. Sarah sat at the defendant's table beside Lieutenant Commander Hayes, facing a panel of senior officers who would decide not just her fate, but potentially the future of gender integration in special operations. The presiding officer was Admiral Rebecca Morrison, a career surface warfare officer who had broken numerous barriers herself during her rise through the naval hierarchy. Her presence on the panel was encouraging, but Sarah knew that even sympathetic officers could be swayed by political pressure and institutional concerns. Lieutenant Webb sat at the prosecutor's table with his own legal team, looking confident and composed. He had clearly been well coached for this moment, and his uniform was immaculate. But Sarah noticed something in his eyes that hadn't been there on the beach: uncertainty. The investigation hadn't gone as smoothly as he had obviously expected. The prosecutor, Commander Michael Stone, began his opening statement by painting Sarah as a dangerous individual who had lost control during a minor disagreement. He described her response to Webb's attempt at reconciliation as excessive and inappropriate, suggesting that her presence in special operations created unnecessary risks for male service members. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stone said to the panel, "this case is about maintaining discipline and order within our special operations community. When personnel resort to violence to resolve disagreements, they undermine the very foundations of military professionalism." Sarah listened to Stone's characterization of events with growing anger, but Hayes had coached her to remain calm and composed regardless of what was said. Every reaction would be scrutinized and analyzed, and any display of emotion could be used to support claims about her instability. Stone's presentation relied heavily on the photograph showing Sarah standing over Webb after their confrontation. He displayed it prominently and returned to it repeatedly, using it to support his narrative of an unprovoked attack by an out-of-control soldier. "The evidence is clear," Stone concluded. Petty Officer Mitchell used excessive force against a fellow service member who was attempting to de-escalate a minor verbal disagreement. Her actions demonstrate the kind of poor judgment that has no place in special operations. When Hayes rose to present Sarah's defense, the atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably. She had developed a reputation as one of the military's most skilled legal advocates, and her presence indicated that this case was being taken seriously at the highest levels. "Members of the panel," Hayes began, "what you have just heard is a carefully constructed fiction designed to conceal a deliberate conspiracy to undermine gender integration in our armed forces. Over the next several hours, I will present evidence showing that Petty Officer Mitchell was the victim of a planned provocation, and that her response was not only appropriate, but exemplary." Hayes' opening statement was devastating to the prosecution's case. She methodically outlined the evidence she planned to present, including the suppressed security footage, Webb's communications with anti-integration activists, and testimony from other women who had been harassed by him. "When we are finished here today," Hayes concluded, "you will see that this case is not about one woman's loss of control. It is about one woman's refusal to be intimidated by bullies and conspirators who seek to deny qualified personnel the opportunity to serve their country." The first witness called by the prosecution was Sergeant Michael Torres, one of Webb's Marines who had been present during the confrontation. Torres testified that he had seen Sarah attack Webb without provocation, supporting his commanding officer's version of events. But Hayes' cross-examination revealed serious problems with Torres' testimony. Under questioning, he admitted that he had been positioned more than 50 yards away from the confrontation and that his view had been partially blocked by equipment. More damaging was his admission that he had been briefed by Webb about what to say before giving his statement. "Sergeant Torres," Hayes asked, "did Lieutenant Webb tell you what he wanted you to say about the incident?" Torres shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "He told us what had happened and asked us to support his account." "Did he explain why your account might differ from that of the Navy personnel who were closer to the incident?" "He said they might be biased because they work with the defendant," Torres replied. Hayes pressed further. "Did he suggest that your loyalty to him required you to support his version of events regardless of what you actually observed?" The question hung in the air as Torres struggled to answer. His hesitation spoke volumes about the pressure that had been applied to Webb's subordinates to support their commanding officer's false narrative. The prosecution's case continued to crumble as Hayes called her witnesses. Petty Officer Rodriguez testified about Webb's pattern of inappropriate comments about women in combat roles, and described in detail how Webb had initiated the physical confrontation on the beach. Webb raised his hand to strike Petty Officer Mitchell, Rodriguez testified. She responded defensively, using only the force necessary to protect herself. It was a textbook example of appropriate self-defense. But the most damaging testimony came from Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez, a Marine Corps logistics specialist who had served with Webb during a previous deployment. Vasquez described a pattern of harassment and intimidation that Webb had directed at female service members under his command. Lieutenant Webb made it clear that he didn't think women belonged in combat units, Vasquez testified. He would assign us to menial tasks regardless of our qualifications, make inappropriate comments about our physical capabilities, and generally create a hostile work environment. Vasquez's testimony was corroborated by two other female service members who had served with Webb. Their accounts painted a picture of systematic harassment designed to force women out of combat roles or provoke them into responses that could be used to justify their removal. The turning point in the hearing came when Hayes played the suppressed security footage. The grainy video clearly showed Webb raising his hand in an aggressive manner towards Sarah, contradicting his claim that he had been attempting to shake hands or make peace. As you can see, Hayes explained to the panel, Lieutenant Webb was clearly the aggressor in this confrontation. His subsequent claims about attempting reconciliation are simply false. The video was devastating to Webb's credibility, but Hayes wasn't finished. She presented email communications between Webb and known anti-integration activists that showed his participation in a coordinated campaign to create incidents that could be used to oppose women in combat. One email was particularly damaging. In it, Webb wrote, "We need to create situations that demonstrate the problems with co-ed combat units. When these women crack under pressure, we'll have the evidence we need to roll back these failed policies." The panel members exchanged glances as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't just about a single confrontation between two service members. It was about a deliberate effort to undermine military policy through deception and manipulation. Hayes called her final witness, Dr. Elizabeth Carter, a military psychologist who had evaluated Sarah's psychological profile and combat readiness. Dr. Carter testified that Sarah's response to Webb's attack demonstrated exactly the kind of controlled aggression and tactical thinking that made for an excellent special operations soldier. Petty Officer Mitchell's actions were not those of someone who had lost control, Dr. Carter explained. They were the actions of a highly trained professional who responded to a threat with appropriate and measured force. When the prosecution attempted to cross-examine Dr. Carter, they made a critical error. Commander Stone suggested that women were inherently more emotional and less capable of maintaining control in high-stress situations. Dr. Carter's response was devastating. "Commander, the research shows no significant difference in emotional control between male and female service members who have completed the same training programs. In fact, female personnel often demonstrate superior impulse control and decision-making under stress." The prosecution's case was in ruins, but Hayes delivered the final blow with her closing argument. She systematically demolished every aspect of Webb's claims while presenting a compelling alternative narrative that portrayed Sarah as the victim of a conspiracy. Members of the panel, Hayes concluded, Petty Officer Mitchell represents the best of what our military can achieve when we judge personnel by their abilities rather than their gender. Lieutenant Webb and his conspirators sought to destroy her career because she succeeded where they hoped she would fail. Their attack on her is an attack on the principles of merit and equality that define our armed forces. The panel deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with their verdict. Admiral Morrison stood to deliver the findings, her expression grave and formal. After careful consideration of all evidence presented, she announced, "This panel finds that Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell acted appropriately in defending herself against an unprovoked attack by Lieutenant Marcus Webb. All charges against Petty Officer Mitchell are dismissed." But Admiral Morrison wasn't finished. Furthermore, this panel recommends that Lieutenant Webb face charges for assault, filing false reports, and conduct unbecoming an officer. "We also recommend a full investigation into the conspiracy to undermine gender integration policies within our special operations community." The hearing room erupted in chaos as Webb supporters realized that their carefully planned attack had not only failed but had exposed them to serious consequences. Webb himself sat in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how completely his scheme had backfired. Sarah felt a surge of vindication and relief, but also a sense of responsibility. Her victory would send a message throughout the military that women could not be intimidated or driven out through harassment and conspiracy. In the weeks that followed, the investigation recommended by the panel uncovered a network of personnel who had been working to undermine women in combat roles. Several senior officers faced disciplinary action, and new policies were implemented to prevent similar conspiracies in the future. Lieutenant Webb was court-martialed and sentenced to dismissal from the service. His military career was over, his reputation was destroyed, and he faced civil liability for his actions. The man who had thought he could hit Sarah Mitchell and get away with it had lost everything. Sarah returned to active duty with her reputation enhanced rather than damaged. Her handling of the conspiracy against her had demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and integrity that the military valued. She was promoted ahead of schedule and selected for advanced leadership training. But, perhaps most importantly, her victory opened doors for other women who wanted to serve in special operations. Applications from qualified female candidates increased dramatically, and the success rate of women in training programs improved as the culture began to change. Years later, when Sarah had achieved the rank of commander and was leading her own special operations unit, she would reflect on the night when Lieutenant Webb had made the worst mistake of his life. His attempt to prove that women didn't belong in combat had instead proven that they belonged everywhere their skills and dedication could take them. Lieutenant Webb had thought he could hit her and destroy her career. Instead, his regret would last the rest of his life, while Sarah Mitchell continued to serve with distinction and honor. She had proven that when someone underestimates a Navy SEAL, regardless of gender, they do so at their own peril. The lieutenant had learned too late that Sarah Mitchell wasn't someone who could be intimidated, bullied, or broken. She was a warrior, and warriors don't back down from fights they didn't start. Webb had started a war he couldn't win, and his complete defeat served as a lesson to anyone who might be tempted to follow in his footsteps. Sarah's story became legendary within the special operations community, not just as an example of individual courage, but as proof that excellence knows no gender. She had turned what was meant to be her downfall into a triumph that changed the military forever.